What's going on, everybody? Kalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Cricket Splendor and going over everything you need to know about this phone to help you decide if it's the right one for you. So let's get started. So this phone has a 6.5-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 268, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. We got a water drop notch up here for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 2 megapixels. So overall, the specs for this display are pretty standard. I want to say the vast majority of entry-level phones is going to have the same kind of display, around 6.5 inches, an LCD display, 720p, all that. But with that being said, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because this display, while not being anything special or really good in terms of quality, is a decently large display. So if you're doing stuff like streaming videos, reading, that sort of thing, you're going to benefit from having a large display like this. In addition to this, the phone has a decently slim design, so even though you're getting the benefits of a large display, it's not super bulky, so it's still going to be comfortable to hold in your hand and carry in your pocket. Now this phone has 32 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion. Now this is definitely not a very large amount of storage, so even for the average user, 32 gigabytes is probably going to fill up pretty quickly, so I do recommend getting a microSD card for this phone. But with that being said, although the storage really is pretty small on this phone, also consider the phone's price range. This phone is less than $50, so although it would be nice to have more storage, for a really entry-level phone like this, it's not really that bad. I mean, I've seen phones with as little as 16 gigabytes, so it can definitely be worse, and despite the fact that 32 gigabytes again isn't that much, it's still at least usable. Now there's no wireless charging with this phone, which is not very surprising. Definitely not a feature I would expect from a phone like this, but we do get a fingerprint scanner right here on the back, and not every phone in this price range is going to have one of these, so that's a real nice thing to see. We're not getting face unlock with this phone, but since we have a fingerprint scanner, it's not that big a deal. So with that being said, let's give this fingerprint scanner a try and see how well it works. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, this fingerprint scanner is real fast and responsive. No issues here at all. And once again, it's really nice that this phone actually does have a fingerprint scanner, because although most phones, even entry-level ones, do, once you get to phones under $100 like this one, it's more common for them not to have a fingerprint scanner or face unlock, and in those cases, you're stuck using a PIN, which can be inconvenient. So taking a look at the rear camera setup of this phone, we don't have a whole lot of features here. We only have one single camera, and this camera is 8 megapixels. So if you're planning on taking a lot of photos for social media or something like that you want to keep and you want them to be nice, then I would recommend going a step up and looking for a phone with a better camera setup, because this one is not going to have very many features and the quality isn't very good either. Now with that being said, if you just want to take a couple photos here and there to send to friends and family, or if you're just using Snapchat or something like that where the quality really doesn't matter, then I could see using this camera. But other than that, this phone doesn't have a depth sensor, so there's no portrait mode. There's also no ultra wide, no macro camera, pretty much no extra features. So while this camera is still acceptable to use in certain situations, the lower quality and lack of features can definitely be limiting if you're a more frequent camera user. Now the same principle is going to apply for video. This phone can shoot videos in 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, which is technically a good thing because again, in phones in this price range, this is where we start to see some phones only being able to shoot in 720p. So at least this phone can shoot 1080p videos, but at the same time, these videos are not going to be very good quality, either audio-wise or video-wise. Just like the camera not being the best quality, the microphone in this phone isn't really the greatest quality either. So at the end of the day, what we can really take away from the camera setup of this phone is that it's really meant for basic activities. And if you're a frequent heavy camera user, if you're shooting lots of photos and videos, you're probably going to want to look at a different phone with a better setup. Now internally, this phone is getting 3 gigabytes of RAM with the MediaTek Helio 820 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on the phone, and it came back with a single core score of 148 and a multi-core score of 510. So the processing power of this phone, while not being the worst I've seen, is definitely not the greatest either. It's going to be perfectly fine for basic activities. So if you're sending text messages, making calls, browsing the web a little bit, and maybe doing some light social media activities, this phone should be fine, and you should also be okay streaming videos on YouTube and stuff like that. But really, if you're on your phone a lot, if you're constantly browsing the web and using social media, I would probably recommend getting a different device with more processing power, because although this phone is perfectly fine for basic activities, it's definitely not the fastest. It's for sure going to be on the slow side, and this is really going to be noticeable, especially if you're on your phone a lot. And if that's going to be the case, then spending a little bit more money to get a slightly faster phone is going to be really worthwhile, because it's going to give you a much better experience than this phone. But on the other hand, if you're rarely using your phone for anything beyond sending text messages and making calls and that sort of thing, and you really don't need anything else, then this phone should still get the job done. Now, this phone has a 3500 milliamp hour battery, so not the best in battery life either, but it's also not the worst. You'll get a decent amount of battery life throughout the day, but if you're using your phone heavily, you'll probably have to charge it before the day is over. In addition to that, down the road in terms of longevity, again, it's not going to be the worst, but it's not the best either, as the battery degrades, which all of them do. With smaller batteries like this one, you're going to notice it a lot quicker than, say, a 5000 milliamp hour battery, so as a result, the phone just won't last as long in general. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a really long period of time, then this phone, while not being the worst option, is probably not going to be your best bet either. But again, it kind of goes back to the same thing as with the camera and the processor. If you're really not using your phone for a whole lot, if you just have it for basic activities and pretty much nothing more, then this battery should be perfectly fine. But if you're constantly on your phone and just doing things with it in general, you'll probably want to look for a phone with a bigger battery. This phone also doesn't have NFC, which is really not a big surprise to me. In case you don't know what it is, NFC is the technology behind contactless mobile payment services like Google Pay. So with this phone, you're not going to be able to use that feature. I'm personally a big fan of NFC, and I do believe that one day pretty much every phone is going to have it. It's one of those features like a fingerprint scanner that's taking a little bit of time to catch on, but eventually I do think it's going to be more of a standard. We've already started to see lower and lower end phones having it, so I feel like it's only a matter of time before phones like this get it too. But with that being said, this phone doesn't have it, so if that's a feature you're looking for, then you're going to want to look for a different device that does have NFC. So now that we've gone over some of the specs of the phone, let's take a closer look at the device itself. On the left here, we got the slot for the SIM card and the micro SD card. On the bottom, we got a 3.5mm headphone jack, the microphone, a USB-C port, and the speaker. On the right, we got the power key and the volume keys. On the top, we got the noise canceling microphone. On the back, of course, we got the camera, the flash, the fingerprint scanner, and there's a Cricket logo right down here. The back is made of a matte material that looks decent and doesn't pick up too many fingerprints, although in the right lighting you can really see them. Overall, like I said before, the phone has a decently slim design, so you can get all the benefits of having a larger display without having a phone that's really huge and bulky and uncomfortable to carry. As far as the materials go, the phone does feel a little bit cheap. It's basically just cheap plastic, which for a phone in this price range isn't very surprising. But despite this, it still does feel decently sturdy. But in conclusion, my final thoughts about the Cricket Splendor. Overall, this is definitely a decent entry-level phone for someone who only needs to do basic activities like sending text messages, making calls, maybe some light web browsing and social media use, taking a couple pictures here and there to send to friends and family, and maybe streaming the occasional video. For stuff like that, this is not going to be a bad phone, especially for the price. It's a really entry-level device under $100, just a touch under $50 for that matter. So for what it is, I wouldn't say it's bad, but if you're expecting any kind of performance or features, if you want to take nice photos for social media, maybe something like portrait mode, or you want an ultra wide camera, or you want to record videos, if you want to do any of that kind of stuff, or if you're just going to be on your phone a lot, I would suggest looking for a slightly higher end phone than this, because this phone really isn't meant for that type of activity or usage. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And as always, I will see you in the next video.